oppressive m-au transformat. Imatur și respins ai devenit. Asta iuresc și detest când
Sandwiched between Ukraine and Moldova on a tiny strip of land mostly on the left bank of Dniester, ruled by a Russian-backed oligarchy unrecognized by anyone, poverty-stricken and hemorrhaging people consistently. That's Transnistria today. Why does it still exist? And how is the local leadership pulling it off amid consistent pressure? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the 8th featured installment of Knowing Moldova. So in this episode we'll wrap things up on Transnistria. In the previous 2 episodes I explained the brief history of this place and also how it functions. This episode will be shorter because explaining why this place continues to exist is very easy. Everyone that matters is happy with the status quo since everyone gets almost everything they want without the national or international accountability that would come with them getting what they want. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Okay, maybe not that short. But seriously, that's really how this goes. So, there are 3 perspectives here. Transnistria, the rest of Moldova, and Russia. Let's go through each of them, albeit they're all interconnected. As I was saying in the previous episodes, Ukraine at some point in the 1990s supported Transnistria's independence bid, but things started going south in 2004 and continued to stay cold even during the time of pro-Russian President Yanukovych, and then they went completely south after 2014 when Ukraine's leadership switched from ignoring Transnistria to treating it as a security threat. Up until 2010 or 2011, the local leadership could count on consistent Russian help, passive collaboration at least from the local authorities in the eastern part of Ukraine, and ineptitude from Chisinau, or even collaboration outright when pro-Russian administrations would win the elections in Moldova. By 2012, things began to no longer work that well. Slowly but surely, Russian help started to dwindle, and with it the old model, which relied heavily on Russia bankrolling the whole thing. With the onset of the war in Ukraine in 2014, things have gone from bad to worse, with local cars no longer easily permitted passage into Ukraine, and thus further deterioration of the economy, which was already quite heavily reliant on all sorts of commerce, and oftentimes more contraband. It should be noted that up until 2011, Transnistria was effectively ruled by this guy, Igor Nikolaevich Smirnov, the founder of the nation. You see, many post-Soviet places have been in this situation, ruled for many years by the guy who proclaimed the independence. Nursultan Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus, Islam Abduganyevich Karimov in Uzbekistan, and Igor Smirnov in Pridnestrovia. Sure, not all post-Soviet places are like that. Some evolved into decent democracies like Estonia, Lithuania, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, or even Armenia and Ukraine. But Pridnestrovia, being an unrecognized territory that modeled itself by choice after the USSR, it sure did follow a more authoritarian outlook. During Smirnov's tenure of 20 years, most of the deals made in Transnistria were in fact personal. That is to say, you wouldn't cut a deal with the government of Transnistria or the Supreme Soviet, but with Smirnov personally. So when Smirnov fell out of power, well, so did most of the framework under which Transnistria was not just governed, but also under which it would function in relation to Ukraine, Russia, and most importantly, the rest of Moldova. As I was saying in the previous episode, Transnistria is basically a corporate feudal place with most of its economy either directly owned or indirectly ruled by the corporation Sheriff. Well, at some point in 2010, the Sheriff Corporation decided that Igor Smirnov, the founder of the nation, was no longer fit for office. The reasons were both economical and political. The economical reasons were due to Smirnov's failure to reach an understanding with Chisinau on how to continue to run the commerce, which, in a place so small as this, is almost entirely international. The political reasons were even simpler. Russia no longer trusted Smirnov. You see, Igor Smirnov in 2006 decided to have some democracy and called a referendum. Two questions. Question 1. Should Transnistria ditch any further attempts to independence and potentially reintegrate with the rest of Moldova? A bit over 96% of the voters said no. Question 2. Should Transnistria maintain its independence and seek a potential integration with Russia in the future? A bit over 98% of the voters said yes. Well, Russia didn't particularly like this, neither at the time nor now. As evidence for this, I will submit the fact that Russia, to this day, does not recognize the so-called republic, and the Transnistrian ruble continues to be unrecognized to this day even by the Russian bank. So, in 2011, when time for presidential elections came, Russia expressed lack of confidence in Smirnov and endorsed the head of the Supreme Soviet, an unremarkable boomer named Anatoly Kaminsky, and the corporation that owns this place outright endorsed this guy, Yevgeny Vasilyevich Shevchuk. And he won, beating both the sitting president and the Kremlin-backed candidate. This chap was an interesting character. It seems that in the end, nobody liked him. He refused to continue some of the corrupt ways of the founder of the so-called country, which granted him appreciations in the Council of Europe. He had pushed successfully in 2005 for electoral reform to make the process more transparent, the process which eventually also grew his faction and propelled him to the presidency, and he continued to describe himself as a quote, social democrat technocrat with a European outlook and a man of profound democratic beliefs, unquote. However, the first thing he did when inaugurated was to issue a decree on the implementation of the results of the referendum held in 2006 in order to facilitate a possible future annexation of Transnistria by Russia and to synchronize Transnistrian laws with Russian ones. The electorate loved that, but everybody else disliked that. So he was already off to a terrible start with the powers that be in the region. And again, the powers that be here are the rest of Moldova, Ukraine, Russia, Romania, Germany, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. You can put those in any order you like, but if you piss off too many of these entities, you're not in a great position in Transnistria. It just is what it is. So, with this populist technocrat in charge, the economy takes a downturn. War in Ukraine breaks out, the economy takes yet another downturn, and gets himself and most of the government on a EU sanction list. Oops. So, in 2016, the corporation Sheriff decides to ditch him and instead endorse this chap, Vadim Nikolaevich Krasnoselski, a man even younger than Shevchuk, born in the far east of Russia and a militant on all things Russia. For instance, he was sent for military service in Kharkiv, and that's where the fall of the USSR caught him. He refused to pledge allegiance to an independent Ukraine, although he did not refuse the passport. He holds Russian and Ukrainian citizenship. Well, he got re-elected in 2021, and Sheriff Corporation and Russia is very happy with him. Two reasons for this. The first one is that most of his term coincided with the term of Igor Dodon, the pro-Russian president of Moldova. In fact, Igor Dodon conducted a state visit here in Transnistria, only the second Moldovan leader to visit Transnistria in any official capacity. That also paid dividends. The commerce with the rest of Moldova opened up, and even though the relationships with Ukraine never really improved, he managed to at least stop the deterioration, which was good enough to get the economy back to growth. He also slowly managed to make more sectors of the economy to work without relying on stipends from Russia, which pleased Putin since he was preparing to start cashing out on the investment here, and most definitely wasn't keen on pouring more money into this black hole. Perhaps things would have continued to go pretty well, but the pro-Russian Dodon lost his bid for re-election in the rest of Moldova in late 2020. The communists also lost their majority in the Moldovan parliament in the summer of 2021, and soon after, Moldova started implementing the same policies as Ukraine. The pandemic also didn't help. Moldova and Ukraine outright ignored all of the Western hysteria about the Wuhan flu, but Romania, Germany, and Italy, which comprise more than 80% of Transnistria's trade, went to various levels of retarded over the pandemic. With Italy the worst, Germany second worst, and Romania pretty bad, especially by Eastern Europe standards. In the meantime, the former president, Shevchuk, actually fled to Chisinau and avoided being sent to jail here in Transnistria. And here's your first clue of just how messed up the politics of this place are. Shevchuk was not sent back to Transnistria because Moldova doesn't recognize this place. Then, after he got sentenced here in absentia, he then fled to Russia, which also did not send him back, even though Russia is allegedly a friend. On the Moldovan side, the new regime may want to be harsher on the separatist regime, and in some ways it is. But it can't be too harsh for at least two reasons: energy and corruption. On the energy side, the issue is simple. A large portion of Moldova's electricity comes from this place, the Kuchurgan power plant. This place has its own clusterfuck. The village that this plant is named after is in Ukraine, but the power plant is in Transnistria, and it produces electricity with gas. The gas comes from Russia, but the money for it doesn't go to Russia, but to a shell corporation that belongs to another shell corporation that belongs to Sheriff. That would be the same Sheriff Corporation that owns everything else in Transnistria as well. Although it hasn't happened recently, it's not far-fetched at all for the Transnistrian regime to use this power plant to pressure Moldova. It happened in 1998, 1999, and 2009. These three events brought serious energy crises in Moldova. It happened a few other times too, but at lower scales. Although it's been more than 10 years since it hasn't happened, Chisinau knows very well that it can happen again. Also, Moldova pays one of the highest prices in the world for gas compared to incomes. Putin's regime just doubled the price again in April 2022 to as high as $1,200 per 1,000 cubic meters, almost as high as Germany, but at incomes oftentimes at a tenth of Germany. This already in itself is a bloodbath for the population, hence the crippling inflation. Unlike President Joe Biden, President Maya Sandu of Moldova can honestly say that her country is suffering because of Putin's price hike and Putin's inflation. So, there's that. And then there's the corruption aspect. Politicians of all political parties in Moldova, yes, including Maya Sandu's PAS, have their own personal deals in Transnistria. If Transnistria becomes independent or is integrated into either Moldova or Ukraine, those deals are off for good. Any fundamental change in the status quo is bound to balk every entrenched interest. Of course, currently the media, in the rare moments it even discusses this aspect, will focus on the deals of former President Dodon and other prominent figures in the pro-Russian Socialist Party of Moldova. And it's true that Transnistrian interests are represented more in that party, but it's also true that they do exist in the other parties as well. The current ruling party has 63 seats out of the 101-seat legislative in Moldova. However, when it comes to topics that deal with Transnistria, sanctions against Russia that might affect Transnistria, those bills pass by 54 votes. Conveniently, nearly all of the Russians in the ruling party are either absent or they abstain from these votes. I'm sure you all agree that it's all just a simple coincidence. So the trade-off is simple. Transnistria allows the electricity to keep on flowing, it even agrees on less than insane prices for it, and in return Chisinau allows the regime's businesses, such as the steel plant in Rybnica, to continue to export through Moldovan banks, allows Tiraspol to buy from European markets, mostly Romanian, and then legally bring them to Transnistria without much oversight. And then there's Russia. And this is where it gets even more complicated. Russia would like Transnistria to play a more active role in the current war in Ukraine, yet the local leadership is far from keen on this one. Contrary to everyone's expectations, including Russia's, 3.5 months into the war and Transnistria did not budge. At some point, some provocations were staged. The headquarters of the local KGB was bombed in April. I mean, look at this footage. It glows in the dark like a freaking quasar. This is what the so-called president of Transnistria had to say about it, though.
Кроме того, я хочу обратиться и к руководству соседней Молдовы. Не поддавайтесь и вы на провокации. Не позволяйте втянуть Молдову в агрессию против Приднестровья. Надо все-таки вспомнить о наших мирных форматах. И 1+1, и в формате 5+2, и работе соответствующих групп в развитии формата 5+2, решать вопросы жизнедеятельности наших двух государств. В любом случае не допустить никакой агрессии, которая может быть стать прологом большой войны. Ни в коем случае. Мы должны договориться и договориться о мире прежде всего. И сохранить этот мир.
Now, whether the provocation was Ukrainian, Russian, or even local from the pro-war faction is of little importance, and we can't even pretend to know, at least for the time being. Likely we'll find out in 10 years, if ever. What is more important, however, is that the leadership thought that the first thing they should do was to reassure Moldova that this will not get them into the war. Not appeal to Moscow for help, since they're allegedly convinced that it was the Ukrainians who did it, not to prepare defense against a possible Ukrainian invasion, but to appeal for peace to Moldova. Some said that this was weird, but it's not weird at all. Right now, Transnistria continues to even exist in the first place because of the routes to Romania through Moldova. If those are cut off, the whole place is dead in 3 weeks, literally and figuratively. Crossing into Ukraine is, of course, off-limits in these times, and help from Russia can't come anyway because Russia doesn't have air supremacy over Ukraine, and by land it's also not an option. Russia has invested a lot and turned this place into a fortress. Now it would like to cash big on the investment, and suddenly the re-elected so-called president disagrees. To make things worse, even though there is intense Russian propaganda here, it just doesn't seem to work.
Eu sunt din Tiraspol. Nimic nu se întâmplă, tot este normal. Oamenii sunt îngrijorați, cei mai bătrâni, fiindcă ei cred că a fost că ucrainenii vor să atace Transnistria, dar cei mai tineri care înțeleg situația adevărată, ei sunt calmi și cred că va fi tot bine.
Ну, конечно, страшно становится, что, не дай бог, разгорится так, что будет, как и на Украине. Сразу какие мысли появляются? Брать вещи, деньги, детей и подальше отсюда.
А куда?
Не знаю, куда-нибудь. Европа, куда? В России сейчас тоже не сладко, поэтому Европа.
Dar dumneavoastră de unde sunteți? Da. Bravo, bravo de la Chișinău. La cei de la Chișinău și de la Parlament și de la guvern, tot spuneți că noi nu suntem încă așa, dar suntem îngrijorați să iei măsuri. Și în primul rând să iei măsuri cu ăștia, trolii ăștia care îmblă și acolo vor și să le vei Putin acolo, pe el de Dodon și cu cine acolo, bătrâni, țârde.
Почему это все происходит? По какой причине? Наверное, вот что-то вот назревает.
А кому это надо?
Вот это вот именно. Кому это надо? Никому не надо. Так хорошо жили, так все нормально было, прекрасно. Мы так радовались. А тут на тебе такие волнения. Вот все нормально, очень хорошо, все прекрасно. Почему? Ничего нет такого, я не заметила. Чтобы русскоязычный что-то притеснял кто-то. Нигде никто не притесняет. Все очень хорошо. Пожалуйста, езжай в Молдову, там нормально все. Вот я в Кишинев часто езжу.
В Бендере сейчас живете, да?
Бендерой, да.
Я боюсь, что сейчас небезопасно, потому что
понятное дело, бомбят, а вдруг на следующий день ко мне придут и мой дом разбомбят, или, не знаю, я буду gulять и будут стрелять. Это, безусловно, небезопасно, и надо с этим что-то делать, разбираться как-нибудь.
Toată e liniște aici, lumea trăiește ca lumea înțelegi, dar să începi explozii, chestii, diversii și mâine nu știm care e situația. Înțelegeți cum?
Nu vă simțiți în siguranță neapărat aici?
Care siguranță? Păi și, glumiți. Nu e aici la noi nicio siguranță, nic. Cât e teritoriul ăsta deci e legat cu Moscova, pe aici nu poate fi siguranță, înțelegi?
Ouch! Now, I can't pretend to know how the future will look like. Of course, it depends on many factors. How long is Putin going to rule? How long will this phase of the Ukrainian war last? How will the political equilibrium in the rest of Moldova will last? There's plenty of factors, and each of them by themselves able to change the future of Transnistria. But one thing is certain. The separatist regime is trying, once again, to maintain the status quo as long as possible because for them too, this is the best case scenario. So yeah, this is the shortest version of the politics of Transnistria and why this place continues to exist. Of course, there are more side stories and innuendos and partially proven stories. If you speak Romanian and Russian and come with me to Chisinau for a few days and have the necessary chats with the relevant people, you'll learn plenty of details that are only partially provable. But if I introduce those in the video, then not only the video would get really long, but it may not be entirely factual, since, again, some things that are considered known, even on both of the banks of Dniester, may not be entirely accurate. So I'll stick to what I've said and shown, for these facts are certain and undisputed. And after all, the series is called Knowing Moldova, not understanding all of the facets of all rumors surrounding Moldova. It's been almost a year since the snap parliamentary election, when we went to Moldova for the campaign. In the next episode, we will discuss a bit of the campaign, the results, I'll even show you exclusive footage from the winner's headquarters, yes, of course we went there, and perhaps more important, discuss the politics of the result. You see, once the enthusiasm of the win waned, and it did quite fast, reality set in, and it ain't pretty. Almost a year into the rule of Action and Solidarity Party, and they already poll less than half of what they got. They got 53% of the votes in July 2021, now they barely poll at 22%. And the socialists are already wrapping up the preparations of a new figure, Russia with smiley faces coming to Moldova. And the so-called pro-Western party has no idea what it's doing. So, yeah. Now that you have a decent idea about the political background of Moldova, we can go into the nitty-gritty of the campaign and the current politics. That's why I made this series, because if I had made just one longer video about the election, hardly anyone not from this region would have understood the importance or most of the details. So, there's that. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks a lot for watching. Please consider subscribing, and if you like this kind of content, do consider sending me to the Gulag. Soon enough I shall hit Central Asia, and oh boy, there's plenty of interesting stories to bring from there. You won't get this kind of content anywhere else. Tourism in the former Soviet Union is done by many people, but the politics of the ex-Soviet space? That's not so easy. And with that said, I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.